The Obama administration is openly escalating its campaign against private gun ownership and shaking up the top ranks of the military command structure. But is it also preparing to make war on the American population? According to a person identified as a former senior military official, the answer to that shocking question is yes. World-renowned educator and human rights activist Jim Garrow says that the source is a man regarded as one of America's foremost military heroes. He told him that President Obama is using a new litmus test for determining who will stay and who must go among top-ranked military leaders. That test is whether they will fire on U.S. citizens or not. Dr. Garrow says that his source made the disclosure in order to sound the alarm over the administration's plans, but while Garrow will not yet reveal the identity of the source, it's important to note that Dr. Garrow himself is a man of considerable accomplishment. He is the founder of the Bethune Institute, which has established hundreds of schools throughout China. 3 years ago, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work through a group called Pink Pagoda, which combat gendercide in China. That is, the practice of rescuing baby girls who had been abandoned or targeted for infanticide because of the government's one-child policy. He was personally involved in helping to save the lives of more than 50,000 children in China. Dr. Garrow, we'll talk about your source in a moment, but first, could you please explain what exactly is this new litmus test being used by the Obama administration?
Well, I think what's been expressed to me is that officers at the highest level are being asked a hypothetical question in which they're asked, would you be able to follow your oath of office and follow the command structure and the orders given you by someone in a rank above you, up to and including the commander-in-chief, if a scenario developed where a group of people would not submit and lay down their arms when ordered to, could you find yourself obeying the order to fire on American citizens? That was what was presented to me.
Now, Dr. Garrow, your source is someone who is considered a legend in the U.S. military. Could you please describe how you met him, why we should believe him, and why he contacted you to describe this so-called litmus test?
Well, years ago, I used to sit on the board of a magazine out of Washington, D.C., named Crisis. It was a Catholic magazine. And through that involvement, I got to know people like other board members. William Bennett, he was Secretary of Education. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Alexander Haig, Bill Simon, who signed the dollar bill. These are the sorts of people that I got to know. And so as a result of associating with them, I was introduced to this gentleman who at that time was, in fact, still in the military at the highest rank. And it was during my traveling across the country that I ended up spending a night at his home and got to know him fairly well and was in fact introduced at a football game, I guess the homecoming game of his alma mater, where he was, I guess, the honored guest. And when he got up to speak, he dragged me up to the podium with him to introduce me. He was that kind of person, not putting himself in the forefront, but always considering others. So I held him in high esteem then, and when I received a phone call from him expressing real concern about what he had just heard from an officer that he had brought into the military and encouraged to get into the military as a young man, who had also risen up high in the ranks, and explained to him that he was being forced into submitting to this litmus test, and frankly he had failed and had resigned his commission. So he had called this gentleman to let him know what had happened. And the gentleman who phoned me knew that the message needed to go out. It was a serious, what he felt, breach of the Constitution of the United States and the Second Amendment.
So your source heard it from another gentleman who it was actually applied to, who then resigned his position.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so now let's talk about the Counterterrorism Center for a moment, because at West Point, they've published a paper identifying so-called anti-federalists as domestic terrorist threats. Do you believe that similar views inspired the Obama administration's litmus test?
Well, you have to, I think you have to understand, and I know you do full well, but the audience should understand that the way Obama does things is he always speaks to his own narrative. They speak to their own philosophy. They support their own belief system, their own worldview. So everything you see him doing is setting up a reinforcement of his belief. And I believe that is a socialist Marxist belief. And that is what he is doing when he says, I'm going to take away your guns because look at the awful situations. Well, it's his political minions who have said quite clearly, you never let a crisis go to waste. And what you are seeing is that he's doing just that, taking crises and making them to his own advantage and manipulating even children to the point that his point is being made.
So you're saying that even in the case of Sandy Hook, he's taking advantage of those children who were brutally murdered in that grade school, and he's taking their deaths and using them to his advantage to follow through with his agenda?
Yes, and the agenda is about controlling the American public. It has really nothing to do with guns, although with his obligation, the debt obligation that America has, China is quite concerned that behind every blade of grass, as Yamamoto said, there will be a gun. And they do not want to have to face the ire of the American public. I think once they understand that Obama is selling out the natural resources of the country. And by the way, these are all parts of the discussion that I had with this.
And I want to get into that in a moment. I want to talk about China and the debt, because I know you have a very unique perspective on that working there. Let's talk about, from these conversations that you've had with your source, is there reason to believe that the Obama administration is actually conducting something akin to an ideological purge of the military with this new litmus test?
That's the belief of this gentleman, yes. And that's what he is not afraid of, but has great concern that America is at the edge of seeing totalitarianism techniques used to cull the ranks of people who in good conscience, believe that the Second Amendment rights or constitutional rights are in fact sacrosanct. He obviously does not believe that, and his moves to date show quite clearly that he does not believe in the Constitution.
So you're saying there's sort of a separating of the wheat from the chaff in the military ranks to find who will actually fire on American citizens? Is this what your source believes?
That's exactly what the source believes, and his fear is that the American public are going to be victimized to an ideology that is far from American. In fact, what he has expressed to me very clearly is that the moves that this man has made, Obama has made, clearly show that he does not understand the American psyche or the American culture. It's not what he is. It's not. You begin to wonder: is the man even American?
Well, are you saying that he's just detached from the American culture, our own president?
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen very carefully to what he says. You would think you were sitting in a socialist Marxist indoctrination program in some university.
Now, I want to ask a question here about your friend, because he's obviously seeing what's happening in the United States. Is it similar to developments in other countries that have descended into dictatorship?
Oh, this is the pattern. It is the pattern. What has been totally unexpected, though, was that that the media would play such a large role as a cheerleader rather than as being the fifth estate, the examining arm of the public, exposing the things that are wrong. But what you have seen is a failure on the part of that media to do just that, to bring out the facts. They have become more an arm of the government, an arm of the propaganda mill of Obama and crew.
You're speaking of the national media syndicate?
Yeah, the mainstream media, I think you call them.
Well, let's talk about the dictatorship for a moment, because the American people probably don't see what could be this dictatorship. Do you think that this dictatorship is simply wrapped in the red, white, and blue, Chevrolet, apple pie?
Well, it seems to be, but the moves themselves, never listen to the words of Obama. Watch what he does. If you're sucked into believing the rhetoric, believing the propaganda, then what you're doing is you're looking at the left hand while the right hand's stealing your pocket. Stealing what's in your pocket. And that's quite deliberate. It's a Barnum and Bailey huckster style, and that's what you see with Obama. He very clearly is one of the great communicators when he's got his teleprompter working,